The United States has a tremendous spending problem. It's not a revenue problem, it's a spending problem. If drastic measures are not taken, the insolvency of the United States can create an enormous debt and monetary problem. The absolutely unsustainable level of public deficit is not due to any recession, any crisis, or due to any problem of revenues. With record revenues, the Biden administration has implemented a policy of overspending that has created an unsustainable level of deficit. This deficit is a threat to the US dollar as a world reserve currency and is also creating a fiscal crisis that can lead to a debt crisis in the future. Because with an administration that has no fiscal space in a period of growth and record revenues, what can happen in the future is that the United States enters into a very significant debt crisis if it doesn't address the spending issue. And yes, the problem of the United States is a spending problem. $6.75 trillion of public expenditure, an increase of 10% in fiscal year 2024. This is absolutely insane. The level of expenditure is $2 trillion above the 2019 level. And despite record tax revenues, a growth economy, and low unemployment, the level of deficit is so high that it's going to be one of the highest deficits in the developed economies, similar to that of France. And remember, when you copy France, you get the stagnation, the debt, and the unemployment problems of France. So the most important thing for the next administration is to stop the bleeding and cut mandatory and discretionary spending. Interest expense, despite the Federal Reserve purchasing bonds and the Federal Reserve maintaining relatively low interest rates, interest expense is rising to an absolutely unsustainable level. The economic limit has been exceeded. More debt is not creating higher economic growth. In fact, it is deterring growth, and it's also creating a very significant problem for the private sector and for families. Second is the fiscal limit, is that interest expense remains elevated despite low rates and Federal Reserve support. And the inflationary limit, which means that the government continues to create further inflation, and the Inflation Reduction Act actually became the Inflation Perpetuation Act. The United States is growing, and is growing significantly above the euro area and significantly above the UK. What's most important is to stop copying the euro area and the UK in its policies, because the trend is pretty obvious: stagnation, high debt, discontent, and elevated inflation. So the United States can strengthen its growth because it can grow faster than what these projections are showing, and faster and also in a more solid and sustainable way, driven by the private sector and not by deficit spending. Because if we look at the past 3 years, most of the growth of the US economy came from way too high government spending. So substituting government spending for more investment, higher economic growth, productive economic growth is essential to avoid the path of the euro area and the UK. It's important for the United States to continue to be a growth economy, not copying the stagnant ones. Another very important problem created by elevated spending and huge printing of money is inflation. Inflation in the United States is not under control. In fact, if we look at the latest figures, it is worsening for citizens. What that means is that inflation is not under control and core inflation is way too high. Citizens in the United States have lost 24% of purchasing power of the US dollar in the last 4 years. That comes from higher government spending, which leads to higher money supply growth. Number one, government spending 10% above 2024 levels and money supply growth at 27-month high. Therefore, inflation is not under control, and inflation is a direct consequence of elevated government spending and high money supply growth. The cumulative core inflation is rising, and it should be the least volatile and should be actually the one that should be reducing quite significantly in the last months. However, core CPI continues to rise. Therefore, it is absolutely critical for the US government to stop the bleeding of government spending, reduce money supply growth, and strengthen the private sector and the purchasing power of citizens. Negative real wage growth in the last years. A.J. Anthony shows these figures, and it's incredible to see that an economy that is growing, that has a technology and energy leadership, is seeing at the same time this disaster in real wages. It comes from too much government spending. Another important element of the Trump administration is going to be the energy policy. The United States can grow its oil and gas production to 18 million barrels a day, but also continue to lead in renewables and in nuclear. It's a holistic approach to energy that focuses on the United States not just being a technology leader, but an energy leader, energy independence as a core principle. Finally, what's most important about it all is to maintain the US dollar as the world reserve currency. Curbing government spending, reducing the deficit, and putting public finances under control will improve the purchasing power of citizens, will reduce inflation, and will strengthen the position of the US dollar as the world reserve currency. All other policies are actually putting the US dollar at threat if it continues this way. So, to avoid a fiscal and a monetary crisis, the United States really needs to tackle government spending. It's the core element: reducing government spending, strengthening the public sector, leadership in energy, leadership in technology, and an improvement of the balance between government and the private sector to strengthen the private sector. Keep defending freedom. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your comments below, and keep defending freedom. Thank you very much.